without further ado, you're here to meet our wonderful, amazing women. Together, we're talking like 90 years of experience. So this should be a very interesting night with some great conversation. So let's meet each of them. And we'll start through the alphabet. We'll start with Anna.
Hi, thank you, Anne. What a nice introduction to all of us. As Anne said, I am an alum. I'm an alum of Carondelet. I'm class of '86, so I was actually Anne's classmate. My name is Ana Buenaventura, and I am a licensed clinical psychologist. I live in Washington, D.C. I have a private practice here in D.C., and I'm also the director of clinical training at the Institute for Psychological Sciences, which is a graduate school in Virginia. Psychology is a second career for me. I actually worked in the arts for a very long time. I got into this general field when I started helping high school juniors and seniors with their college applications. And then beyond that, I worked again in a university setting in career counseling. And basically what happened with that is I found myself working in these areas of major transition. But I found that I was really interested in understanding how this person who was sitting in front of me came to be. And so then decided to go back to school, and this is where my work is now. I'm delighted to be here.
Great, thank you.
Hi all, I'm Beth Limburg. I am class of '83, and I have a degree in psychology, clinical psychology. I'm currently the manager of clinical and support services at Hope Solutions, which is in housing. So I work with families that used to be homeless and are now kind of stabilizing in housing and moving on with their lives in a much more secure way. And it's been an interesting road to get to this point. I started 30 years ago working with kids and families, and that's always been my passion. I've got some special training in play therapy, some special training in infant preschool mental health, so working with birth to 5 kids and their families, and also in kind of multicultural setting and training and all that sort of stuff. And I've just worked in nonprofits for however long. I've also really enjoyed teaching and training, and so I've done some training nationally and also internationally. Had opportunities to train in Canada and in Japan a number of times, and now I'm kind of back into community mental health again, which is my thing. Somewhere in there I taught doctoral students, university level stuff, and again, I've just always really loved community mental health, and so that's where I'm back now, just not in your typical community mental health setting, but still doing a lot of work there.
Great, thanks.
Happy to see you all.
Wonderful. How about Camille? Unmute.
I'm still muted. Okay, well, there we go. We got that out of the way. First person to do it. So I'm Camille, class of '89. I currently have I only got boys, so I have a junior at De La Salle and incoming class of 2025 also coming in there. So I got the teens around me at home and at work as well. I'm a licensed marriage family therapist with a specialization in child and adolescent work. I really wanted to focus in on child work. I feel that from the very beginning, that's where we start really developing all of our relationship models and tools, and impacts us in our adult life. So I thought that, and still think that early intervention is really key to not only the success of individuals, but as a society as a whole. So that was my focus, and it still is. And then, but I predominantly worked my early years in Head Start preschools throughout the county, Contra Costa County, and really love working with that population, that 0 to 5, and definitely different needs there. But I've moved on to private practice, where I have a private practice in Walnut Creek, and I am also the co-founder and clinical supervisor of up and coming master's levels associates. at Silver Fern Child and Family Therapy, also in Walnut Creek, where the focus, again, perpetuates that development of a wellness journey and wanting to try and impact all groups in the population and make everyone feel heard, seen, and hopefully have their, I know cliche, but best life with some tools and guidance. So that's me.
That's great. Thanks. Laura.
Hi guys, my name is Laura Howd. I'm a licensed professional counselor. I live in Denver, Colorado. So I graduated from Carondelet in 2007. So since then, I've lived in Colorado. I went to the University of Colorado Boulder for my undergrad, and then moved over to Boston and went to Boston College for my graduate program, and then made it back way to Colorado. So I really love it here. But since I moved back, I've worked in a variety of different settings. I've worked with eating disorders. I've worked, done some crisis work and some work with suicide. And I've also worked in a community mental health setting, working with a variety of different populations. So when I decided to open my own private practice in about 2017, I was just really excited to focus on what I was the most passionate about, which is young adults. So I really love working with college age or recent grads, people that are just kind of trying to figure out their place in the young adult world. I specifically focus on the quarter life crisis, which is just, just what it sounds, just that time of young adulthood where you're trying to figure out what to do, who you want to be, a lot of identity work. We put a lot of pressure on ourselves, I think, that we're supposed to have everything figured out. And so I really like to normalize that it's normal not to have it figured out. More specifically, I love working with body image distress. That's one of my passion areas, especially working with women who've either had eating disorders or just dealing with distress around their body image, distress around eating. I think that's a very big thing in our society. So I really enjoy working with that. I also work with some substance use, depression, and anxiety, kind of across the board, but really all the issues that those young adult populations really struggle with. So yeah, that's me.
That's great. Thank you. Stephanie.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Sandbergen, and I'm also a graduate of Carondelet in '91, and my daughter is a sophomore. And this is actually my second career. I was like in software development for a while, but this was something I always wanted to do. I was a peer counselor at Carondelet and just kind of went to school at night. And I've been licensed now for about 7 years, I guess, officially. And I've had experience with eating disorders, with working with the elderly, and grief counseling, a community center. And now I'm at John Muir in Concord, which is a really great program. It's hard for me to pick age groups. I do love the little ones and the teenagers and, the adults and elderly, but I am really loving the work with adolescents the last few years. So I'm happy to be here tonight.
Great, thank you. And finally, Therese.
Hi, I'm Therese Gallarducci. I'm class of '87, and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. And my day job is I'm a high school counselor at Village High School in Pleasanton, which is the continuation high school for the district. And so I've been there 14 years. And prior to that, I was a counselor at St. Patrick St. Vincent High School in Vallejo. But I am a licensed therapist, and I work a lot with siblings that have a sibling with Down syndrome. So I do some work with the Down Syndrome Connection. But I also do work through BetterHelp.com, which is an online platform you may have seen advertised. And I'm able to do virtual therapy with a variety of clients, but mostly young adults and a few adolescents. And I really like adolescence and young adulthood and all of the complexities that they bring to the world. So thank you for having me tonight.
Great. Well, now we know everyone, so let's get into the thick of the presentation. And I think Anna's going to lead us off.
Okay. All right. So what is ambiguity? There's a nice definition here. the fact of something having more than one possible meaning and therefore possibly causing confusion. I think that's a great definition. When I think of ambiguity, I think of our world now. Everything is so unknown, so unclear. When I think of ambiguity, I think of when whatever is known, whatever is the framework, is no longer there. You know, the path seems murky and unclear. Ambiguity also, however, in my mind, I think means that there is possibility, because it's not, the future is not set in stone, so to speak. But I think ambiguity can be really, it's a moment of possibility. It's also a moment of great distress. And we were talking right before we started here about what we thought of ambiguity in terms of, you know, life development. And I was thinking about the work I've done with college students, and that moment of graduation, where it's everything that they've all been looking forward to. You know, they want to graduate and become an adult finally. But what it means is that you're embarking on this part of your life that is no longer known to you. So I think about it as sort of like, you know, you've been on the train track all your life. You know, you've been in school, elementary school, high school, college. All of those, as you get older, you have more and more choice, more and more ability to decide what your path is going to be. But you have a path, you know what the next step is going to be. When you graduate, it's like those train tracks all of a sudden disappear, you know, and it's so exciting because you get to be the author of your life. But also there's that moment of like, oh my God, I get to be the author of my life. You know, what happens now? The path is open, it's exciting, but I have to build the tracks now. So when I think of ambiguity, I think of that. What about the rest of you?
Yeah, I'll kind of piggyback off that just because I work so much with college students and young adults. I completely agree with everything you said, Anna. And, you know, sometimes when there is a plethora of choices, you know, that can be very exciting in many ways, but it can also be very distressing. And a lot of times, you know, specifically young people, when they're kind of forced with this or faced with this for the first time, they're overwhelmed by the amount of choices. And often that can kind of even create sort of this like paralyzing reaction. And I obviously everyone reacts to this in different ways. I mean, some people thrive on having a lot of choices, but some people really get stuck and realize that there's too many choices, so I'm just going to not make a choice without realizing that that's a choice in some ways. And so that can cause people to go down a lot of rabbit holes around, you know, emotional rabbit holes, whether that's with anxiety or depression or a number of things that we'll talk about. But I think that, and, you know, I also think about the pandemic and how this has been a really great example of ambiguity of not knowing what's going to happen next. But so a lot of people are really struggling not only with already having to deal with that in life, but also now that everything's changed, how do we figure out what we're supposed to do here? So that's what came to mind for me.
I just wanted to add what I see a lot, especially this time of year, May, June, is self-sabotage of our young people that may be graduating or may not, but especially if they're graduating and they really don't have a plan, whether that be high school or college or even a trade school or some other milestone where they don't know what's coming next. And they do things that they don't realize, kind of like Laura was saying about choices, where they are so afraid to take that next step that they do things to try and prevent themselves from taking that next step. And a lot of my work this time of year is around them feeling okay about not having a step, but that it's okay to not have a step, and okay to move forward, and what those possibilities might be like.
How
I'll
about you,
toss
Beth? I
in.
know you have a different perspective.
Yeah, I work a lot with kids and their parents, and I just thinking back to my old training where they talk about temperament and the easy kid who can do anything and anytime, and you can change up the schedule whenever you want, and oh, it's such nice things, and the anxious kid or the slow to warm kid who wants to just kind of put the tip of the toe in first and will watch, but once comfortable will fully engage. And then they have a temperament that they struggled for the longest time and finally just settled on difficult, because that's what it was. And these kids need a structure and they need a schedule, and it better not vary. And if you tell them you're going here at 2 o'clock, you better show up there at 2 o'clock, because 2:01 is not going to work. Or going to the other place, even if they love it, at 2 o'clock is not going to work because they had planned on going to place A. And so what I see and in kids and what I hear from parents is just this very wide range of tolerance for ambiguity, for uncertainty. And so even with kind of the typical parenting and typical structuring, some kids need more. They really need warning. They need to know 2 days in advance if they're going to the doctor's office. And they need to plan for it. They need to talk it through and play it through and think it through in their head and all that sort of stuff. And so I think there's a piece that is kind of just in the child, in each of us as we grow up, that represents our tolerance for the unknown and for ambiguity. And what I've seen in my own life is I have a 9-year-old who I have always considered to be a slow to warm kid, right? He wants to check things out and then he's totally into it. But you can't just drop him off. He needs to stand next to me for, however long he needs to observe before he can really enter in. And during this pandemic, especially during the last few months, he's not a slow to warm kid anymore. He's a difficult kid. He now is completely, now you're not supposed to change temperaments. That's kind of the rule of temperaments, I suppose, but he does not have the flexibility that he had before. And so I think that we all come with kind of our internal sense of tolerance, but I also think that under stress, that tolerance can change. And in kids, that becomes the moody kid or the kid who's, mad because you got him a chocolate ice cream cone because they were out of strawberry. And he loves chocolate ice cream, but it doesn't matter. He had in his mind he was going to have strawberry. And that's that. And so I think the stress of the pandemic has also kind of bumped up a notch on people's tolerance, or maybe drop down a notch on people's tolerance for ambiguity.
Can I jump in here as well? We're thinking a lot about our students, our children. One of the questions that's coming up for me, especially during this period, is what does it mean to be a caregiver, a parent, when you're needing to care for someone else and you feel like a lot of ambiguity. And what does that mean? And I don't have an answer right now, but I know that we're talking to a lot of parents and also wanted to put that out there, that there's tremendous pressure when you yourself are feeling ambiguous and wanting to create some certainty for the people you're caring for.
Right. And I'll add on to that. As a parent, that's tough. I was talking to someone about something that happened last night, and she was trying to say, well, could you have handled that better? And what I thought was, I have adjusted my entire day trying to handle it better. And I got to the end of the day and I was done handling it. And there was nothing left. And so I think, and I've got good reserve. And I was done. But I realize it's not just the parenting, it's managing my child's anxiety and frustration with school, but it's also my job. Those of us who are all on this call are all, who are presenting are all mental health professionals. So chances are you've all had the same experience as I have. We go from these intimate, in-person, relationship building stuff And all of a sudden we're on a Zoom and it's different. And I'm trying to think of what's going to happen in the fall because I need to hire a new intern. And am I telling that new intern that she's going to be working or he's going to be working online? Or am I telling that person that they're going to be in person? Or am I telling them they're going to be both? Because I can't predict. So it's for parents and for workers and for everyone who's got multiple roles in the world, which is, I think, everyone. It's a lot.
And the only thing I can add to that as a parent is I'm usually wrong without a pandemic, and now it's just went up like tenfold. Anything that's wrong in the day is now my fault. So does anybody have any questions? Just wondering if anybody has any questions in the Zoom chat. It's okay, anytime you can put it in. Let's go to our next. Whoops. And I think we're going to talk a little bit about signs of distress from different perspectives. And I think Camille was going to kick us off.
Definitely. I think we've without labeling it, we've talked a lot already about anxiety and fear, but I want to kind of spotlight the difference because anxiety is definitely a word in our common culture. I think that gets thrown around a lot. And with good purpose. I think anxiety is definitely, especially in our teens, but then in the entire population with the pandemic is very prevalent and more so now. And so just kind of quickly to say, how would I distinguish between anxiety and fear? Fear is very tangible. You know that there is a direct threat to you and you can see it or it's rational and you know about it, such as, you can look and there is the bear coming towards you, you need to act. That's fear. Anxiety produces the same chemical reaction in our body. We have the same response to it. It's just we can't see what the threat is. So it could be a virus, but it could just be also the messaging that we're getting or not having control over things. I like what Beth was kind of alluding to there, just that lack of control in our lives and feeling powerless. And there's a lot of that right now. I'm definitely hearing that not only from parents, but also from teens who usually have it all together, but they don't because they don't have that roadmap. They don't have those train tracks as to how to go back to school. What's that going to look like? Can I hug my friend now or not hug my friend? I don't know because everyone has different rules. And it just creates an opportunity for people to not really know how to react, how to communicate or communicate well. I think most of us don't have the words to express how we're feeling in those moments. And then especially the younger you go, the less capacity you have for an emotional vocabulary. So that can easily get mixed up. When you're afraid, I know everyone's heard fight, flight, or freeze. There's a fourth one I can't remember off the top of my head right now. There's kind of a new version, but I think it goes along with freeze of just avoid. It's just complete nervous system shut down. People sometimes will just need to go to sleep. I have a lot of clients who, when they get overwhelmed, they go sleep for 2 hours. And that's just a somatic response to it, the nervous system doing that. So understanding where that might come from, that, people may need that break and they may need to, everybody responds just differently. Some people are like, let's do this. I need to make a plan and I'm a go-getter. One's not better than the other. And we don't necessarily always have control over how we respond to fear and then anxiety in that way. So being patient with one another, being patient with ourselves and understanding how is it that I react? Why might I be reacting this way? And then how can I use a new tool? It was coping skill and tool blended together. That did not work. So how might I do that? And sometimes that's a good opportunity to do a little research or talk to somebody, or even talk to someone like us to help identify what that is and what that works for you. I wanted to mention just a little bit more about returning to the world. It's one of the things I hear a lot in my adult clients, as well as I mentioned, in my younger clients, is what are the expectations? At the beginning of the pandemic, it was kind of chaos. Nobody really knew. Do you wear a mask? Do you not wear a mask? Okay, all of a sudden we're all wearing masks. Okay, that kind of works. And then if you didn't wear a mask, then it kind of got all funky. But you know, you knew what the expectations were. The social rules: 6 feet apart, don't hug your friend, elbow, whatever. Everybody kind of got that. Don't go to school, stay indoors. And then now the messaging is changing, but we're not knowing how to adapt to it that quickly because there's no clear path. And that's the ambiguity we just talked about, but that is causing a lot of distress. Even kids who were really great about going to school, I'm hearing them go, I'm a freshman. I've never been on campus. I don't know what to do. Because now it's, you know, a couple months into that, but let's say March, or some who haven't returned, you know, maybe if you were in another school, I'm going to show up my first day as a sophomore, and I'm a sophomore, I'm expected to be a sophomore, but I've never been on campus. I don't know where my locker is. I don't know how that works. And all those fears are presenting themselves. And to Beth's point as well, I'm not sure if I froze or not. I froze on my screen, so sorry.
You're good. You're good. Oh, now you're frozen. How about Therese? I know you have experience with depression. Camille's frozen. Now she's anxious and frozen.
Okay. Well, similar to anxiety and fear, depression encompasses so much, and it can look so different for different people and at different stages of development. And what depression might look like for an adult, it can be completely different for an adolescent, completely different for a child. And so it's such a broad category. I'm just going to talk about some of the things that you might see specifically with adolescents. What may come up for students or your adolescents, your kids, is irritability. And it will look slightly different than typical teenage irritability, and that they, you know, typically don't like their parents at this stage. This will be pretty extreme. And so when you're looking at some of the things that we're going to talk about tonight, we're also looking at a spectrum and the extremes of this is not what you would typically see in your adolescent. So agitation, irritability, not being able necessarily to cope, kind of like what Beth was saying, the typical coping strategies are no longer working. And the adolescent feeling really shut down, not knowing really what to do next. They may be very isolated, whereas maybe they were participating in Zooms or trying to connect with friends, and suddenly they're not doing any of that. Any of their typical daily living activities, even with our shelter in place and with COVID, whatever they adapted to, now they're not doing those things either. So a lot of isolation. And when we go back and talk about extremes, also, like, are they sleeping too much? Are they not sleeping enough? Are they eating too much? Are they not eating enough? Maybe they were kind of into video gaming. Now that's all they do. So we'll talk about other signs of distress, but just to kind of think about depression is it's a different level of sadness, and it's not it's when their basic coping skills they're not able to achieve those anymore, and they're feeling very hopeless and very helpless. And that also, you might be feeling very hopeless and very helpless trying to navigate this with your adolescent.
That's great. Thank you. Go ahead, Beth.
Yeah, I'll toss in. Therese covered it very nicely for adolescents. It's actually very similar in children, but it can throw parents because we think of depression as being, can't get out of bed, too tired, all of that. And like Therese was saying with adolescents, it's very similar with younger kids. And yes, children can get depressed, and yes, children can have anxiety disorders and all of that. But it tends to be more activated, I think, in kids than it is in adults. And I'm not sure, maybe similar or even more activated than teens, but there's agitation and impulsivity and frustration tolerance goes way down. Kids can get really argumentative. Kids with anxiety try to control the heck out of everything. And it makes sense if you think about it, because they're trying to control the world so that they don't have to be scared of whatever they're anxious about. But it's not effective. It doesn't work, but they still try it and try and control. Kids can get aggressive when before they haven't been aggressive. They can certainly get withdrawn and unhappy and hopeless. And I've seen kids as young as 5 express concerns about, I wish I wasn't alive, which we'll talk about a little later in general. So all of the things that you think might be happening with adults can also happen with kids. But sometimes we miss it. Sometimes we see the distractedness and the impulsivity and we think, oh, that's ADHD or whatever else, when really it's anxiety or depression. And also, as Therese said, the sleeping and eating go off. They either eat more or they eat less than we might expect, which is hard because kids go through growth spells. But, even within that, they may sleep more or less. They may be afraid of sleeping. They may have a hard time falling asleep, or they may wake up frequently during the night. So there's all of these things that we may be comfortable in talking about with adults, but are still present in the young kids.
Thank you. Laura, I think you were going to maybe talk next topic.
Yeah. So I'm going to touch on trauma and kind of how that relates to sort of a difficulty in tolerating stress. So trauma is really a reaction to extreme stress, especially when someone is unable to, or when someone's feeling out of control and doesn't have any ability to cope or avoid that stress. So that's when something really feels traumatic, is there is that stress, it's extreme, and there's no way to escape it, no way to keep yourself safe. We often think about trauma as a single event, something that happens once and we're sort of left with a scar from it, whether that's a car accident, an assault, something specific that happens, a natural disaster, something like that. And yes, those things are all very traumatic, but I think what can actually be more common in some ways is that trauma can not only occur from a single event, but an ongoing string of stress that happens over time. So a lot of times, abuse that happens over time, or domestic violence, or, I think the pandemic's also a great example of, yes, there is sort of the single event of the coronavirus and this just happening, but really it's happened over the last year. So I think it's not necessarily the pandemic that's been traumatic for people, but the impact of this pandemic over time, of the change of what it's like to have your whole life turned upside down, and a year later, it's still not being back to normal. And I think there's so many different situations that go on for so many different people that have led to sort of this internal change of trauma. And there's a lot of different, I was thinking about, specific to the pandemic, just because this is what we're all going through, is there's sort of direct trauma that the pandemic has caused, whether that's, grief and loss from loved ones. I mean, even back from the beginning, like feeling unsafe to go outside your home, avoiding other people or being afraid of people because you don't know whether they're going to get you sick. Being forced to be away from loved ones over time, or losing loved ones that you're not able to see. Isolation, all these things I think are really a direct result. But then there's also the kind of indirect traumas that have occurred from the pandemic, which, I think of things like, kids that are having to stay at home with abusive families, for example, that maybe school actually is a safe place and they're not able to get outside the home. Or, with young adults, a lot of college kids have had to go back home in ways when they thought that they were actually in that place of ready to move on, and be able to experience the world. A lot of life transitions have been shifted in a way that can feel traumatic and kind of have this lasting impact of their identity. And, I even think about, boredom is another thing too, of like not having anything to do, like not, a lot of people lost their jobs, not really having anything that really they can look forward to. And so I think substance use and other things pop up, which we'll also talk about later. But I think trauma, it's this very tricky thing. It's not this super simple concept for me to even explain in a couple of minutes, but I think really it's this very strong reaction that can show symptoms, that can even show up as nightmares or really being jumpy to stress, reacting really intensely to things, having really negative thoughts. All or nothing thinking is a really big one. So getting really caught in extremes of like, it's either this way on the extreme or it's this way on the extreme, and there's nowhere in between. Because I think really what's happening after you experience something traumatic is that your body is almost reacting in a way towards survival, right? Like you had a moment of like, I'm not able to survive this moment. And so even after the trauma is over, we're kind of still biologically trying to make sure that we're okay, make sure that we're safe. And so it's easy to go into extremes to try to feel like I'm trying to protect myself. And there's kind of this overprotection of like putting yourself in situations that really actually are safe because the danger is maybe past, but we're still not able to go outside of that because we're still feeling the after effects of something that was so dangerous or painful. And it's difficult to overcome. There's definitely ways to do it, but it can be difficult depending on the situation. But.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Thank you. I think Stephanie, you were going to talk on the next topic.
Yeah, so self-harm or self-injury, so that can look like various things. I don't want to say it's more common, but the more common I see examples are scratching one's own skin with like your own fingernails. It can cause bleeding or not, using objects to cut, hitting or punching oneself. So usually the purpose is not to really end one's life, but it can then become more severe, it can become life-threatening. So it helps to learn like what are some warning signs you might feel in your body, where you can feel some stress, you might start getting hot. The anxiety could be increasing, for example, recognizing triggers and trying alternatives. I work with adolescents, so it's pretty common. And we ask about self-injury on our daily check-in sheet in addition to suicidal thoughts. And so I try to reframe it to parents who get very scared if they see any sort of injury on their child, right? Is that it's a way to cope, but in an unhealthy way, right? So to be mindful of your reaction as a parent, as a friend, because often people that do self-harm, there is some like shame that they don't know what to do, and it's coming out as hurting themselves. And another thing to think about is reasons why people self-harm, and that could be varied. It could just be an impulsive behavior. It can be like high anxiety, not able to find a different way to cope, feeling numb and wanting to feel something, punishing oneself. So also trying to find out what's going on. Why is someone hurting themselves? And then sample alternatives. There's a lot of things to try to replace the behavior of hurting yourself. It could be simply reaching out to a friend or a professional, doing something mindful, like going on a walk, playing with a pet, meditating. Temperature changes are kind of important and very helpful at times. Splashing your face with cold water, holding ice, or taking a hot bath, snapping like coated rubber bands to get that kind of, there's some sting and some feeling to kind of replace it without hurting yourself. Drawing or painting on one's body or skin. So that's kind of what I've been seeing in self-harm and self-injury. I don't know if anyone else, I think someone else was going to jump in at this topic as well.
I don't know if Camille's back on or not.
Okay.
I think we're going into Camille, if she got back on. Oh, she's muted.
I see her. No.
All right, Camille, we got you? No, we don't. Can't hear you. So if there's anybody else who wants to talk about life change, or we can go into substance abuse and impulsive behavior.
Oh, well, actually, sorry, can I go back? I was pausing before going into suicidal thoughts.
Sure.
Thanks, Anne.
Yeah, of course.
So suicidal thoughts too can be just what we call passive. It could be, not wanting to wake up, not wanting to get out of bed. And when we ask the kids that, they say, oh, I definitely didn't want to get out of bed and go to school or come to program today. And so it's like, okay, are these suicidal thoughts or just not getting enough sleep, right? Or just being exhausted. It could be an emotional exhaustion and not wanting. It's just, life is hard, especially this last year. So we have a lot of what we would call like the passive suicidal thoughts, and just life would be easier if I wasn't here, right? Life is hard. And I try to normalize that it's okay to feel this way. It's okay to think this way, right? Then it can become where someone really doesn't want to be here, right? They have some sort of plan. They have maybe means to actually attempt something. So when we assess patients on a daily basis, is there a plan, right? And ways to keep safe. And sometimes it's just kind of taking it day by day and educating them. What do they do if they're not feeling safe? Is that reaching out to someone? Is that calling, telling their parents, right? Going to the emergency room for an evaluation. So that's what I had to talk about there.
That's good. Thank you. One thing I was just thinking about between what you just said and when Therese was talking, and this we see here at school, and I think it's with a lot of kids, is it's like normal to talk about how depressed you are right now, which I don't remember that as a kid. Like, that wasn't my topic of conversation. I'm more depressed than you, but that seems to be very common right now. And I don't know if that's a good thing, where if they're really depressed and they're trying to share it, or if it's just I just want to say it because everyone else is saying it. So that's my parent question. So if anybody has an answer for that one.
I think depression is another one of those words that gets used. We use a lot of words in common. I had the worst biology test. I've been traumatized, but it's not clinically traumatized. It's just a way to say that was really stressful. And I think the same happens when kids will talk about depression, or adults will say, oh, I'm depressed, and what that often means is, at this moment, I feel lousy. I don't have any energy. I'm really tired of all this stupidness that's going on around me. I don't have energy to deal with pettiness, with small things, whatever I consider to be petty at the moment, of course. But I don't have a whole lot of energy to deal with that stuff. And often that's what we're saying when we say, oh, I'm so depressed. And it's not a clinical depression, which is a much bigger picture, but it's a day-to-day. And so then as a parent, I think I listen and I watch for the other stuff too. Is it just a way of expressing, I'm done with this way of having to live with a mask and not being able to hug my friends and not being able to have a party with 50 people, whatever the other would be? Or is there more? Am I seeing a drop in grades? Am I seeing a lack of interest in things that really used to interest me? Am I seeing changes in eating and changes in sleeping? Am I seeing a lack of thought for the future? So someone who used to talk about, when I go to college now, is just saying, yeah, whatever. Maybe they won't even have college when I graduate. So that you're looking for the bigger picture to have bigger worries about whether or not you should kind of have your child talk to someone and evaluated, or whether it's really just a common expression of today sucks.
And I think it's okay. I remember I was in crisis training in college, so very young, and on the sample phone call was someone who was suicidal, and I was so scared to ask the question, are you thinking of ending your life? Like that was going to give the idea to that person. And I think parents are afraid to ask that question, and sometimes you have to be blunt to find out if that's really what they're thinking about.
And I'll also say it's a huge myth that you're ever putting that into somebody's mind.
Mm-hmm.
That's a very common fear, but the person's already thinking about it if they could be thinking about it. And really what they're experiencing, if you say that, is probably a huge amount of relief because they don't know how to speak up about what's really going on. So even though it's really scary to say that out loud, it's definitely the right move. Just to ask.
And if they do say,
go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Anna.
No, I was going to say that I think, you know, when you were saying that, Anne, there is something about there's something positive about that, in the sense that I think that mental health has become so much a part of the younger generation's focus, right? And so they are able to say that, actually, you know, I am depressed, in ways that I think in generations past, you wouldn't even hear someone say anything about it, right? They would just experience it alone. And so in a way, when I hear that as part of the conversation, I feel good about that. You know, I think what everyone is saying here, just echo what everyone else is saying here, is that what we want to do is we want to understand what the unique experience is of that person, you know, so get them to define it. What does depression, when they say depressed, what does it mean, you know? Because depression is not just even feeling sad, right? It's a full body kind of biological experience too. You know, sadness is one of it, but it's a full system experience.
And what I was going to add is if you know, if your child does say to you, yeah, I don't want to live anymore, I can't keep going like this. As a parent, that can be a terrifying thing to hear. And I would encourage you as a parent to take a hold of one statement, which is, I'm here to keep you safe. And everything you do from there on out, you just say, it's my job. I'm the mom. I get to keep you safe. That's my job. And so if you say, I want you to go talk to someone, they're like, no. It's really important that I keep you safe. And to do that, we've got to talk to someone. You know, I don't want to do this. It's really important to keep you safe, and really focus on that as the parent, and not saying the right thing, not doing the right thing, not being perfect. Not being defeated like you did something wrong. That's not how it works. But just to really keep focused on safety, and that's your job at this point until you and your child are safe again.
That's great. Thank you. I know Camille's trying to come on. We're going to give her one last try.
I think I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Ooh, I don't know what happened.
That's living with ambiguity.
Right? I felt it, the anxiety where I was talking, left off with that, and boy, did I experience it a couple times over then. So I'm trying to play catch up. I just want to kind of, go ahead.
No, we have you, we're on bullet 5, which is about life change.
On life change, right. And of course, now I'm all flustered. So with that ambiguity and that anxiety has kicked in. So now my brain doesn't really want to focus on what I said. So in terms of life change and what my notes were about it, but you know, our life has really changed. And there is no going back. So there is no normal. So it's figuring out what is going to work for you, your family, your kids, the people around you going forward. And one of the things I hear a lot of throughout this time of pandemic is people saying, I really don't want to take XYZ into my new normal. I want to leave that. I didn't like that. And I got to get rid of it. And now I'm hearing, as we're starting to normalize and activities are picking up and social demands are starting to pick up, XYZ is like shouting. And it's like, how do you define, how do you create those boundaries for yourself to respect what you're needing, and maybe go back to XYZ because it's a choice, or learning how to say no to it. And adapting what you want to take with you, redefining yourself. This could be a really amazing opportunity for individuals in society to, what do we like? What do we want to keep? What do we want to get rid of? But sometimes it's hard to make that conscious choice. So kind of one of those thoughts about, and that does bring up everything that we've talked about. When those changes happen, then we have everything that's already been described before. You know, it can, because those tracks, now you're the one laying them. I'm going to go back to that, Anna, over and over again. I love it. I'm stealing that one. I'm using it from here on out. Because it's so perfect. But you know, you get to relay them, but where, how? I don't know how to build tracks. I've never had to build tracks. And especially as an adult, because now probably when you're adulthood as a parent, you've already got your train going, you've got a plan, and you know what that next station is. But there's choice, and where there's choice, there's ambiguity, and there's anxiety, fear, depression, etc. So I'm sure somebody else has something they want to chime in on.
I think in the interest of time, because we're getting near the end, we should keep going forward. I know the last topic is substance abuse. And I think one or two of you, I know Beth was going to say something, and I don't know who else.
I think maybe Laura.
I can start.
Okay, go for it.
Yeah, well, so substance abuse is something I do work with a lot, but I think really, again, it's kind of similar to what a lot of these things, we sort of have preconceived notions about what these things look like, right? Like, I think, you know, substance use and addiction, like we might think of, you know, someone who's struggling on the streets, right? Who's very, like, obviously has a problem, and someone that we're really concerned about their outward behavior. But really, it's much more deep and common than that. You know, I think that substance use can play so many different roles. I mean, just for example of, you know, alcohol use is pretty widespread and very common and very normalized, right? And it can be anywhere from someone casually having a drink with friends or family every so often to somebody who's struggling drinking every day. And a lot of people are actually able to function well and sort of hide it, that it's not outwardly a problem, at least to everyone. You know, we're seeing a lot with marijuana too, as it's legalizing around the country, and that becoming more normalized. And that, you know, it's not always easy to see that it's a problem. You know, everyone has kind of their own perspectives on what is okay and what's not okay. But I think when it comes to substance use in any way, especially around distress, is people often turn to substances to feel better. You know, I think that a lot of times we don't know how to cope with what's going on, you know, and when we feel really stressed, I mean, any of the things we've been talking about, anxiety or depression, you know, experiencing something traumatic, like having suicidal thoughts, like all of that is incredibly difficult emotionally. And, you know, kind of like self-harm or suicide, it can be similar in some ways of, like, sometimes we're just looking for where's my out, right? Like, how do I stop feeling this way anymore? How do I feel better? How do I have fun? How do I be social? How do I just feel like a normal person, whatever that means? And we turn to whatever that thing is. And sometimes people can learn quickly. And I mean, I work with a lot of college students and young adults who, you know, are partying in college, and, you know, so there's so much normalcy around that, but it can shift to sort of a darker place or a more difficult place of, I'm not necessarily really able to be with myself anymore. You know, I think when we're experiencing such intense emotions, we just want to escape it. And that can become an issue when it kind of crosses a line where we're no longer able to be with our emotions anymore, you know, and that can be damaging over time, because, you know, you're always going to be with yourself, you know, so figuring out ways to be able to do that is really important. But, you know, I think it's really understandable that sometimes people don't know what those options are to be able to deal with that.
And I just wanted to add really quickly, I really like what you said, Laura, but also what everyone is saying. In regards to substance abuse with teens, the biggest issue that we see in working with teens is vaping. And it's not just vaping nicotine. it's vaping marijuana. And you may have no idea that something that looks like a USB drive is actually a vaping device. So you also it might smell like strawberries, and you think they have some nice, air freshener, or body spray is a huge one for girls, where they just smell so lovely. But you really want to take a look at what kind of little devices might be hanging around, what kind of smells that you're smelling that you haven't before, because it's not going to smell like your typical marijuana. It's not going to smell like cigarette smoke. And vaping, we could do a whole seminar on vaping, but that is something to look for in teens, and to keep your eyes and nose out for that.
Great point. Thank you. Beth, did you have anything, or you want
to? I think it's been covered.
Okay,
we're good.
So this is so we're right at 7. I think we probably have maybe another 5 or 10 minutes to go over these topics, and then if you have questions, please start putting them in the chat, and we'll open up and maybe end in about 15 or 20 minutes. So I think Anna or Beth, we're going to start on this slide.
I think Beth was going to start. I was going to jump in.
Okay. We added survive into our slide here as we were discussing this earlier, but I was laughing and saying, we're going to get some pretty sarcastic humor when it comes to self-care. I totally agree that it is important, but the next person who tells me that I need to do self-care is going to be in big trouble, because I think I'm a parent. I've got a 9-year-old. At what point, especially now, right? Especially now when kids are with us all the time. There's no going to school. There's no going to daycare. There's no going anywhere else. It's just here. So the thought of doing self-care at this time is so ridiculous. Nonetheless, I will say, don't do what I do what I say. And self-care is really important, because whether that's finding the 10 minutes in the car, going to the grocery store to listen to your favorite song, or sneaking up out of bed after everyone's gone to sleep to watch your favorite TV show, or whatever, it's just so incredibly important to figure out how to manage that. And it's so different now than what it was when we were all on a kind of different schedule. My son now calls me the work mommy, because before I would be gone, right? I would be doing the same work that I'm doing now, but I would be somewhere else. And now he sees it in direct competition with life, because we're here all the time. So, but I'll go back over to Anna for some real advice.
No, I think you bring up a great point, which is that I think that, self-care can feel, again, we say it all the time, but it can be one of those things that we can add on to a really long to-do list already, and feel like it's another thing that I'm not able to do. And so it feels anything but generative. It doesn't feel good, actually. It feels like another responsibility that we have to tag on to, so many that are already there. And when I was just thinking about coping skills, I really, I think about it in kind of 2 buckets. One is coping to manage the actual sort of surviving the crisis, kind of coping skills, and then something that you can do that's a little bit more building a reservoir that you can draw from when you do have difficult times. And under the crisis survival skills, I think, anything physical, I think, is actually quite helpful. When you're feeling really distressed, it's actually really difficult to engage your thinking mind, right? I mean, anytime, if you think about, I lost my keys to the house, and you have to get into the house, the kind of distress that you have in that moment, it's hard to actually really access your mind. And so doing things that lower the temperature, either doing something really active. Like I tell some of my clients, running up and down the stairs, for 20 minutes if you're really anxious. It's very difficult when you're really anxious for someone to say to you, oh, sit down and meditate. I mean, you can't do that. So matching the sort of the intensity of the emotion with an activity that matches that, I think, is actually really helpful. And then once those what they would call sort of subjective units of distress go down, you're better able to access your mind and be more creative about solving whatever is in front of you. So there are a number of, if there are questions about that, I'd be happy to answer that during the question and answer portion. The other part is really building a reservoir by making time to hang out with people who really help you develop yourself, or are nurturing to you, or making time in your day to do some pleasant activities. We often, I think, sort of leave that out. Finding ways in which you might feel masterful. It could be that you cooked a great meal, or you learned a new recipe. It doesn't have to be, nuclear science or anything like that, but just something that makes you feel like, I did that well. And so again, I can answer more specific questions about that in the Q&A, but just really sort of thinking about it in those two buckets and how those two things can help you become more resilient when stress does come up.
I do want to mention, one thing about self-care, because I work with adolescents, and at the end of every check-in in group, I ask, what are you going to do today for self-care? Yes, I'm one of those. And if I don't ask, though, now they said, you didn't ask me. And so I use the broad definition, where it can be the basics, like you're not brushing your teeth as much as you want. So today I'm going to brush my teeth for self-care. Or I'm going to set a boundary with somebody. I'm going to say no to this person, right? I use a huge definition for self-care. So it's not just something that's going to take a lot of time or energy or money, right? It's not mani-pedis. It's sometimes just saying no to somebody.
And I was just going to add, with self-care, being self-aware, and kind of socialize, kind of all in one. It is about what's going to work for you and not what might work for the next person. And sometimes we don't give ourselves permission for it to be okay to do something that we like, and to acknowledge that and to say, hey, it's okay. I might really like to journal, but if I tell my next door neighbor to journal, they're going to throw the journal at me. So it's just looking, it's okay for you to develop your own rituals or your own things that make you feel good. I will be the first to admit, I watch Young and the Restless every single day. I record it. Okay, I know that show has been on since about the time I was born, but I'm going to watch it every single day, and it brings me a lot of joy. So I tell people that sometimes, and I'm like, oh my God, I cannot believe that you watch that soap opera. Yes, but it brings me, 40 minutes of joy. And so be aware. That's kind of where the self-awareness comes in, and your own self-care, and also to socialize in any way that fits you. You might not like big crowds, and so socializing doesn't mean for you, I know we can't do big crowds now, but let's say in the future, to go to a concert, but maybe you like to socialize by just having one-on-one coffee, going on a one-to-one coffee date or something like that. And also, when you're thinking about how to cope, sometimes you just need, kind of what Beth said, 10 minutes where you're in the car, you're listening to your favorite song, and you're going to the grocery store. Or maybe you need 5 little 10 minutes throughout the day. So you don't have to think, oh, I don't have an hour in my day, 1 hour of sitting to be able to do whatever I want. And so it's rewarding yourself, and it's also taking little bits of time throughout the day to be able to do something that you enjoy, and then being able to then go on to the next task. So something just to be aware of.
One thing I wanted to go off that, I really like what you said, Therese, about just doing what feels right for you, and that what that really reminded me of is in order to really engage in self-care and for it to actually work, like we have to let go of the shoulds, like of what you should be doing, right? Like what should you do for self-care? And I think that that's so silly, because when you should do something, that's actually not self-care because you don't really want to do it, right? So I think, a lot of people have a lot of guilt when it comes to resting, like a lot of self-care is just sometimes just doing nothing, letting yourself rest, letting yourself take a day off of doing something that you usually do if you can, right? And so, but some people have a lot of guilt that they're not allowed to do that. So I think and then a lot of self-awareness too, of like recognizing if you're like, shoulding yourself is kind of the way a lot of people say it, but, like not just trying not to do that, right? Like if you naturally are inclined to do something that's going to make you feel good, let yourself do that thing instead of convincing yourself that it's supposed to look different, because self-care doesn't have to be labeled as something. It can be whatever actually is going to help you, relax into yourself in some way.
So we do have a question in group chat. I don't know if everyone can see it or not. Okay. So I don't know if someone would want to respond in terms of any thoughts about a pep talk that doesn't further the sense of failure she's feeling, which I totally get. And I think sometimes it's a parent thing, because I know sometimes if I say something, but then if like my next door neighbor says it, she's a miracle worker, and I am, you don't know what you're talking about. So if you guys have some advice on the situation, because I'm sure there's a lot of people who are in this situation with their kids right now, that'd be great.
I don't work a lot with teens, so I'll give you the more general and give the teen heroes here a chance to talk about more specific to that age group. But I think sometimes as parents we want to be the cheerleaders, and I think sometimes we just have to sit alongside and say, yeah, that sucks, and yeah, I can tell you're really worried about that, and boy, let me just sit here with you in that worry, because this is stupid, this is dumb, and this is not something that you've brought on yourself. And so just being there and being present and allowing the sucky feelings is a step, is kind of the first piece. And I think the other piece that I would toss in, and not necessarily in this order or anything else, is she's in the same boat as a million other kids in this country and a million other kids around the world. And I think everyone is going to be different and in different places at the end of this year. And I think the whole world is going to have to get used to what that's going to look like next year and the year after that and the year after that. And so just saying, hey, here's your strength. And it's okay if it looks different during this year. If your strength is being able to make your friends smile rather than to get A's, that's a cool strength. That's an awesome thing. And maybe next year you'll flip back and your strength will be to get A's and all of that. But you're not alone. Everybody is living this different this year, and the whole world knows it. So it's okay. And it's okay to feel, sucky about how stupid this is.
I think sucky is a new word in the dictionary now, just from tonight.
Thank you.
Does anybody have any other comments as we wrap this slide up?
Just that to Beth's point, I think for any age group, it really applies, and definitely with the adolescents, I think it's really empowering if, especially an adult, a parent figure can sit with you and really just acknowledge, repeat back, maybe you can paraphrase, but if you have to use exact words, and that's okay, because then they feel heard. And so much of what we talked about is not feeling heard. And we all want to be heard. We all want to be validated. And nobody has a fix, pandemic or not, there's no magic. A parent can't just magically make their child feel happy, and letting your child know that you are strong enough to be able to hold their feelings, and helps open communication. It makes them feel safe and makes them feel like they can come to you as things go up and down in lives. And so I think Beth hit it right on. It's just really great to sit with it and just be present in that moment with them.
And I just wanted to say, from the practical school counselor part of me, that as far as her trying to get her help and re-engage, also coming from Anne's point of view, it may be that she needs to sit down with her counselor and map out a plan, like a practical step-by-step plan as to what does it look like to re-engage in schoolwork, and what does that look like for her future. I mean, maybe community college is okay. Maybe doing enough to pass her classes, it's okay, and have that kind of outside person but inside person kind of map that out for her. Also, maybe taking small steps if she's feeling really frozen. Maybe, okay, what can you do today? What are your goals for today? And breaking it down. I don't know if she's in person or not, but let's say if she's at home, maybe can you log into every class today? And take those steps. But I'm thinking the school counselor might have a way to have a practical plan to help her get re-engaged.
Great, thank you. So we're right at 7:15, and our last slide is really just where you can go to get help if you think you need it. Besides these 6 fabulous women who, you can get their contact information. I think this was a wonderful conversation, and I'd open it up if anybody, you can unmute and ask a question, or if you want to submit one. But I think a lot of phenomenal content and information and advice was brought today. I mean, I learned a lot.